Cold mornings in drafty rooms. Devon woke up in Paris disoriented. Christian's arms were wrapped around her, and she could feel his steady breathing into her neck. At some point in the night, they had mutually decided that spooning was the only logical way to fit into a twin. She would never tell him she slept soundly in his arms. Peeking out from under the covers, she saw that Beth was still asleep, her head turned away from them, shielded by a mass of her hair. Devon needed to pee and explain. Pee first, and then explain. She reasoned as she untangled herself from Christian and grabbed her toiletries. He didn't move as she stood up, and she gave herself a moment to look at his sleeping figure. He seemed peaceful, but still he had the telltale sign of worry between his eyebrows. It was as though grief had left its permanent mark. Padding to the bathroom, Devon stopped short as a figure passed down the hallway. Creeping stealthily out of Kira's room came Joe. When Devon dropped her face soap, Joe had the decency to look up at last, and at least look sheepish. "Hey, Dee, how was your night?" He winked at her, and she hated it. "It was fine. We shared a room with Beth. Do you know who Kira went home with?" If he wanted to play this game, she could too. "I do indeed, but I don't kiss and tell." He held her gaze for a moment. The same gaze he had given her the night only weeks before. She hadn't meant to go home with him, but there was something so charming about him. He was charismatic, larger than life. He was bright and effervescent, essentially the opposite of Christian. But Christian was steady. She enjoyed his company more than she would care to admit, and he paid attention to her. But Joe was Joe. A few drinks and he was a flirt. A few more and he was almost seductive. It wasn't hard to fall into this trap. When Christian was at home, she had gone out with Kira and Beth, a girls' night of sorts. They split greasy fries and pints at the local pub before hitting a dance club. She was surprised walking in when Joe was already there. In retrospect, she should have known Kira had texted him. But it made no sense. Joe never directly flirted with Kira. He always had his eye on another girl. This night, it happened to be Devon's turn. The thing is, Devon wanted it. She wanted to be wanted by him. There was something about the way he made you feel, like you were the only person in the room, and it left her breathless. At some point in the club, Kira was dancing with another guy, and Joe had walked up to Devon at the bar. "Want to head out?" It wasn't an odd question. Their dorms were close by, and she'd rather go home with him than wait for Kira and Beth for another hour. "Yeah, let's go." She gave a wave to Beth and signaled she was heading out. Beth was engrossed with a guy from Michigan and gave a non-committal wave. Once outside, Joe took off, barely waiting for her. She had assumed they were catching a cab. Joe apparently wanted to walk the whole way home. "Are you crazy? It's like 4 miles." "It's a beautiful night, Dev. What else have we got to lose?" Joe effortlessly reached out and put his arm over Devon's shoulder. She didn't hate it. In fact, she welcomed the physical touch. Joe was larger in stature than any of the other guys. He naturally gave off a protective energy, and Devon enjoyed being taken under his wing, literally and figuratively. They walked in companionable silence for a few minutes, and Devon searched for things to say. Around him, she was suddenly speechless. It was easy to be speechless when Joe did much of the talking. He told her about the stars, the galaxies, even the natural plant life in the UK. She half listened as his hand traveled past her shoulders and down to her waist. She felt electric. By the time they reached home an hour later, Joe's hand had found its way into her jeans pocket and slightly gripped her ass. She was turned on. How could she not be? It was clear he wanted her and she wanted him. She wanted to know what it would be like to be wanted by him more than anything. It happened so naturally she had almost forgotten to pay attention to the details. He walked her to her dorm and then quietly asked if she wanted to come home to his. She nodded yes, and he took her hand and walked the extra 500 feet across the quad to his. He led her inside, and everything was so quiet. You wouldn't think she would have questions. Where was everyone? But no, he was confident. She didn't question it. The thing is, it was amazing. Joe was capable and held on to her with ease that she'd never felt before. He knew his way around her body, and she welcomed the chance to be with a partner who made her feel seen and sexy. Her previous experiences with guys had been awkward and clunky. Their hands always felt unsure on her skin, and she hated the feeling of not knowing what to do. With Joe, he knew what he was doing, and she allowed herself to be pulled in by it. After that first encounter, it became a thing while Christian was away, but always under wraps. She felt mildly guilty for doing this, but Christian had never made a move. Plus, she had no idea what she really felt for him yet. Grief had overshadowed the potential for something new, and Devon was in uncharted territory. Of course, Devon had to keep this a secret. Joe never explicitly said it, but he set the ground rules firmly. They were never together in public. They never sat near one another or physically touched. If anything, Joe made it a point to keep away from her. Devon wished she minded, but the truth was she was using him as much as he was using her. She didn't have feelings for Joe. His personality was exciting, but it wasn't what she was looking for in a partner. It was easy to sleep with him because he made it easy, but if push came to shove, she can't say she would have stayed with him. When Christian returned, they got together one more time. In all the time that they'd slept together at least 2 dozen times, and in that capacity, you get to know someone fairly well. Devin had been welcomed into Joe's perfectly curated world. He gave her tidbits of information about himself, but always kept her at an arm's distance. During their last time together, she was surprised he brought up Christian at all. Dev, what's going on with you and Chris? She was caught off guard. She was under the covers in his bed in a half-sleep daze with no plans of using her brain anytime soon. What do you mean? She rolled her head to the right to meet his eye. I mean, he's into you. You should go for it. He said it so matter-of-fact that Devin didn't know how to respond for a few moments. Propping herself up on her elbows, she tried to come up with the words. Christian's not into me. Plus, I'll decide who I go for, thank you very much. He ignored her firm boundary and pressed on. Devin, he really likes you, and you and I have run our course. Next time you see him, see what happens. With that, he rose out of bed, leaving Devin mildly shell-shocked. That was the end of it. She had been dismissed with such ease that she didn't even feel the sting of the hurt. Looking at Joe in the hallway, Devin sees the glint in his eye, the one that he used to seduce. She could easily become the object of his affection again. It would be so simple to lean into him and play the game. But now, Kira was involved, and she suspected that Kira had been involved for a long while, perhaps even longer than Devin had been in his company. Devin felt a wave of guilt rise up in her, and she took an audible gulp of air. The thought of her being Joe's seconds to Kira made her feel dirty. When they had been sleeping together, she hadn't thought to consider the other woman he had done this with. She perhaps wrongfully assumed he wanted her and only her, but thinking back, the dismissal, the pushing her towards Christian, all pointed to the fact that Devin was in fact not special. Devin was another woman for Joe to have, and she suddenly felt sick to her stomach. Joe moved closer, seeing the color flush from Devin's face. Hey, are you alright? You look like you've seen a ghost. She took a step back and leaned against her door. I'm fine. Yeah, just dehydrated. She felt the door open behind her and tumbled back. Christian caught her in the nick of time, cinching her around the waist and hoisting her upright. If she hadn't felt so faint, she would have been impressed by how easily he held on to her. Unlike Joe, his touch was tentative, almost as if he was waiting for her to say, yes, you can stay here for a while. Morning. Christian used his free hand to brush his hair out of his face. Devin watched as Joe's eyes bounced back and forth between them. She wanted to wipe the smug look off of his face. Morning, Chris. All right, I really need to pee. Devin, always a pleasure. Joe gave a curt head nod to Christian as he turned on his heel and headed towards the bathroom. Hi, you. Christian brushed his lips against her hair. She was still leaning against him, and if she hadn't still felt sick, she would have moved. Hey, she forced herself to breathe. How'd you sleep? She turned around to face him and allowed him to hold her up. Good. I like sharing a bed with you. His eyes were playful and his hands felt sturdy as they wrapped around her back. She knew she could kiss him. It would be easy to stand on her tiptoes and kiss him. She had done it with Joe so many times, but something about doing that to Christian made it feel like she was acting. She wanted to be in love with him, but Joe had broken her trust. She was used and thrown away. She wouldn't allow herself to be used by Christian, no matter how trustworthy he seemed. She reminded herself that she was fine. Christian was clueless, and Kira was hopefully also clueless to her time with Joe. She could easily keep this up herself for the rest of the semester and go on with her life. But if this was really that easy, why did she feel like she was keeping a horrible secret?